There's been some speculation that no matter how happy they are with the current coaching candidates, some of the donors wanted to take one more SEC-sized swing before it's all said and done. Turns out it was a Tuscaloosa-sized swing that we're taking. It makes sense. If you can't beat them, you go steal them away from Bama, of course.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are we feeling, all of our Big 12 brethren? Shout out to the regulators. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your top stop for all things Cowboy and Cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on X at All-Day State. Today, we're brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment matter more, especially right now when new customers can bet just $5. If it's a winner, you'll get $300 back in bonus bets to use all across the app. Make sure that you go download the FanDuel app today. Meanwhile, we get to slide right into this coaching conversation that continuously heats up, and there's been a surprise name that has kind of popped up. Whenever there was some speculation out there that some of the donors and even Chad Weiberg to some degree wanted to kind of take a massive swing before they kind of settled into some of the regular options. Turns out Kane Wommack, the Alabama defense coordinator, was that SEC size swing. Clark Lee at Vanderbilt seemed to be an option. Lane Kiffin was obviously a name that would make sense to take a swing at. But this one kind of came out of left field, but the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. We are very familiar with Kane Wommack because he was the head coach for South Alabama when they walked into Stillwater and beat us. One of the biggest reasons that I find a lot of comfort in this is that is the same team that defensively post-game said that they knew all of the Oklahoma State play calls and they knew what the script was going to be. And even in the fourth quarter, they knew what play calls were going to come. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So that's how we lost to South Alabama, is because they knew ahead of time every single play call that we were going to run. They bragged about it afterwards, about how surprising it was to come in the fourth quarter, and we were running exactly what they were planning on. So shout out to Kane Wommack getting a win against Mike Gundy in Boone Pickens Stadium. And if you can't beat him, well, then you should hire him, steal him, join him, call it what you want to call it. Obviously, Kane Wommack is licking his wounds a little bit because they just lost to OU, but I don't think that we need to let that derail us from the fact that this would be a massive ordeal for Oklahoma State. It would be a name that would reverberate around the college football landscape. His ascendance, you could say, to Alabama is just simply because he decided to make that decision. Now, of course, this is an individual who played fullback and tight end for Arkansas. Then he went on to finish his career at Southern Miss before becoming the quarterback's coach at UT Martin. Then he was a GA Jacksonville State, a GA at Ole Miss. Then he was a defensive coordinator at Eastern Illinois, defensive coordinator, linebackers coach at South Alabama. Then he was a linebackers coach at Indiana, defensive coordinator, linebackers coach at Indiana after being elevated. Then he goes to South Alabama, head coach, obviously beats Oklahoma State. And the only reason he decided to go to Alabama is because he's really close to Caleb DeBoer. South Alabama, the Jags had things obviously rolling, and they were going to be able to attract more talent. I remember we did a breakdown before we played South Alabama and talked about how it wasn't going to be an easy game because they've got like 19 former Power 4 transfers. And then sure enough, they go ahead and beat Oklahoma State. They shouldn't have beat us, but they were more prepared than we were. And they've been able to, acquire a significant amount of talent. So he did not need to leave South Alabama. They absolutely did not want him to. The only reason he left is because Caleb DeBoer called him and said, hey, dude, we're homies. We need to link back up. I need a defensive coordinator I can trust. Will you join me in Tuscaloosa, Alabama? That is the only reason Kane Wommack is not still the head coach at South Alabama. Matter of fact, you could easily see that Kane Wommack probably, if he would have stayed at South Alabama, he'd already be up for a different job as it is anyways. So I do think this makes sense. Another big factor here is the acquisition of talent. If you can get a decent number of guys that are bought into his system at Alabama, that maybe are kind of buried on the depth chart, or they're a true freshman, or they're going through a redshirt season, or they had a little bit of a medical issue, he could bring an exorbitant amount of talent with him, not just because of what he's able to bring at Alabama. We just discussed he was doing the same thing at South Alabama. He was getting guys from Tulane and Purdue and Northwestern and Miami to show up and play for South Alabama. So his recruiting acumen is obviously already visible. We've seen it. We've felt that experience on the turf in Boone Pickens Stadium. And the beauty of that South Alabama team is it had a decent number of Oklahoma players on it as well. So when we're talking about somebody like an Alex Golesh, the biggest reservation perhaps with Alex Golesh would be that his recruiting area right now seems to be Florida and Georgia. Doesn't mean he can't come to Oklahoma State and be successful, but somebody like a Kane Wommack or an Eric Morris or GJ Kinney, they geographically are going to have a little bit better understanding of how to recruit this area and the type of individuals that are going to fit best, not only schematically, but also at your university. So I do think there's a lot of intangibles that equal Kane Wommack being a viable candidate, because if we don't hire him, he's going to get hired elsewhere. He had no reason to leave South Alabama. If Caleb DeBoer was not his homie, then Caleb DeBoer probably wouldn't have been able to allure Kane Wommack to take a little bit of a demotion, because that's what it was. He had things rolling, took a demotion to go work for his buddy. But even Caleb DeBoer knows good and daggone well that Kane Wommack is a head coach. Kane Wommack is probably a Power 4 head coach, and it's only a matter of time before that happens. So I appreciate the fact that we're willing to take this kind of swing. I appreciate the fact that we do have that connection, and we've seen it. There's tangible, physical, evidentiary proof of what Kane Wommack can do. If you can recruit people to South Alabama, come in and beat Oklahoma State back when things were at least perceived to be the rocking and rolling with Mike Gundy, then you're going to be able to kind of take the uptick of resources that is now applicable in Stillwater to NIL and this hiring search and everything else, and immediately get some of those talented young guys from Alabama, from South Alabama, from some of the other stops that you've been able to kind of ingratiate yourselves with. This would be a big move for Oklahoma State, and it would kind of, again, reverberate nationally that Oklahoma State is taking this thing seriously. Things have kind of died down a little bit recently, but you also got to give you a shout out to Carson Cunningham for kind of talking about this Kane Wommack thing. Secondarily, you got to give a shout out to the agency that's running this thing, because things have kind of died down and the news that is getting out there is very few and far between. But at the end of the day, you've seen what Chad Weiberg's been able to do. This hiring firm is the same agency that brought us Steve Lutz. Not only has he been successful on the court, he's been very successful in the recruiting realm. He seems to have Oklahoma State positioned to at least to make a run at the tournament this year, to be a factor in the Big 12. Maybe not necessarily the title race, but we're going to be squarely in the mix in that top 5 spot. So whether it's a Kane Wommack or an Eric Morris, I'm excited about the prospects. Even a Alex Golesh, even a GJ Kinney, even to some degree a Zach Robinson. I think all of these individuals offer different things, but Kane Wommack, this definitely comes out of left field. And it shows that we're taking this not only seriously, but we're willing to take a swing that people outside of Big 12 country don't expect Oklahoma State to be able to carry that level of cachet. But the only coach that we know of that publicly has just flat out said, actually, I'm not interested, is James Franklin. So outside of that, a lot of options are still available. But it seems as though Kane Wommack is a legit option. I think that it's kind of an Eric Morris show with Kane Wommack kind of nipping at his heels. GJ Kinney's probably still involved. Zach Robinson's probably still involved. But if you look at what we're doing, there's not a coach in the country that wouldn't want to at least be intrigued by the prospects of coaching here, because we're dreadful. We've been awful for 2 years, and we're still putting 50,000 people in the stands. We still bleed orange, even in a year that it's understandable if you don't want to make it to every ball game. That's not what's happening. There's still a ton to be excited about. You're hearing that the donors are being more involved. We're spending more money, or at least we're trying to spend more money. We're trying to be more competitive in the NIL era. And it's all very appreciated after this tumultuous 2 years. Speaking of tumultuous, FanDuel is not that. The NBA action is back, and there's not a better place for you to get in on that action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of a game, you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has the live bets on everything from who's going to score the next bucket or who's going to lead the comeback. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. It keeps every game more exciting simply because your investment level increases tremendously, especially when your team's making the late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 back in bonus bets when your first $5 hauler is a winner. So make sure that you head on over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So now we get to slide over to the hardwood, but there's a mat on top. Oklahoma State wrestling was led by the younger dudes. If you go back even in the very beginning, when we kicked off this thing against Cornell and going into NC State, Iowa, Nebraska, some of the guys that you anticipate leading the way kind of struggled to some degree. Troy Spratley, yeah, he's still Troy Spratley, still a top 5 dude. But he had a couple instances there where he didn't quite lead out of the gate like we expect him to. He typically is that spark plug. Now, Robinson, national champion, that's a little bit of a different scenario, but he didn't exactly, cruise through the entirety of the event like you maybe had anticipated. Casey Swiderski, the All-American transfer from Iowa State, has just not been able to muster much. Alex Facundo, he's been good at times, but he also got pinned. Some of the other individuals that you kind of plan on leaning into, somebody like a Connor Doucette, and yeah, he barely. I cannot wait for retribution on that one. Connor Doucette gave AJ Ferrari all he wanted. AJ did win 2-1, but Connor Doucette looked really, really good. Landon Robidoux looks like a bad mamma jamma. Sergio Vega probably was the best wrestler of the tournament, collectively speaking. Ronnie Ramirez looked really, really good. And then I think Cody Merrill was very, very serviceable for Oklahoma State. D. Lockett looked kind of leery in his very, very first match ever as a Cowboy against Stanford, but he did not look like that over the weekend. So the youth movement, the freshmen, the guys that are supposed to be learning the ropes, those are the ones that we're relying on right now. Those are the dudes that are scoring the most points, doing the most stuff, getting the biggest upsets, taking down the most All-Americans. So it allows us to stay insanely excited throughout the course of the season. We didn't beat up on Cornell, maybe like we thought we should have. We took care of business for the most part against NC State. Iowa, they barely got us. We just lost by 2. And if some of these older guys can kind of, get their feet out from underneath them, if Tegan Jamison maybe is healthy by the time that we take on Iowa at the end of the year, that matchup could look entirely different. Just like their matchup wasn't anticipated with Ohio State winning the whole thing. So shout out to the Buckeyes getting the dub, getting the $200,000 check. Iowa gets $150K. Oklahoma State gets $150K, third place recipient. And like I said, we were just barely behind Iowa. I think Zach Ryder is another one of those individuals that we thought we could kind of depend on this season. He is winning, but he's not doing a lot of pretty stuff. He's not getting a lot of bonus points, and that is going to add up whenever you're playing or on the mat against somebody like an Iowa. Thankfully, we get to circle that, and we get another shot at retribution against Iowa at the end of the season before you go into the national title race. But at the end of the day, we have a lot to be excited about. If some of the mainstays, the Troy Spratleys, the Richie Figueroas, the Casey Swiderskis, Alex Facundo, Zach Ryder, if those guys can kind of solidify the anchorage of in between the young dudes, then we are legitimately going to be able to make a little bit of a push this year. Again, nobody's probably going to push Penn State for a title, but the battle for second place, as we just witnessed, is going to be worth its weight in gold. Ohio State obviously was surprising. Last year, Nebraska was surprising. We beat Nebraska up and down the mat like it was absolutely easy. We treated Nebraska like a redheaded stepchild. Matter of fact, that Nebraska coming into it was supposed to be the hardest matchup other than Iowa, of course, and they were the easiest of all of the matchups. Cornell was better, NC State was better, Iowa was better, Nebraska got absolutely manhandled. Bo Hardy, right? Somebody that is in contention for a national title gets majored. Like, the youth movement in Stillwater is insanity. And there was a couple different reports put out, or at least some speculative things in regards to Jax Forrest wanting to wrestle at Oklahoma State this year. So the next semester, he would be available for Oklahoma State. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. That would be the worst news for teams like Iowa and Ohio State, Nebraska, if Jax Forrest would be able to wrestle for Oklahoma State this year. But it doesn't make sense, right? Because likely he'd be at 33. I think we just witnessed Ronnie Ramirez can definitely hold it down in the meantime. Maybe Richie Figueroa can kind of figure some things back out again. If not, Ronnie Ramirez seems to be an adequate individual to carry us throughout the course of the season. And why would you bring Jax Forrest in just to wrestle a very, very, very short season? And I get it. Jax Forrest wants to wrestle the top guys, and there's not going to be anybody in high school that's really going to test him to the degree that he's trying to get tested. So I do see that there could be a little bit of merit if anybody in the country could pull off, graduating high school early and enrolling in college early and having the availability and talent to instantaneously be a benefit and make a run at a national title. It would be Jax Forrest. However, I don't think that it would be beneficiary for him. It's not like we're absolutely struggling to put somebody at that weight. Don't get me wrong, Jax Forrest getting on this team would do wonders for Oklahoma State. But why rush it? Jax Forrest is still going to be that good whenever he arrives on campus. Even if it is early, I would still like to see him keep this red shirt. If he were to come in early to Oklahoma State, I think it would be a little premature to put him out there. Thankfully, though, there seems to be some individuals that don't think this is really likely. But, there are some people out there that cover wrestling for a living that are kind of floating this idea that this is something that supposedly Jax Forrest wants to do, or somebody in his camp maybe said that he would like to do. At the end of the day, David Taylor is likely going to guide Jax in the right direction. Even if it's great for Oklahoma State, he's probably going to look out for what's best for Jax in his future moving forward. The hardwood without the mat time is a basketball. The Cowboys did, in fact, get a W, but it was really the first chink in the armor that we've seen this season. It was an 85-69 comfortable dub. We probably could have pushed it a little bit more if we really, really wanted to. Anthony Roy made his debut as a Cowboy, and he did not disappoint, coming up with 15 points off the bench. Victorious Miller scores another 13. That dude is slowly becoming one of the funnest individuals on the roster to watch. Andre Vukovic looked pretty good. I think Isaiah Coleman looked good. He might be the best dunker we've had in quite a few years. Lefteris Mantzoukas played pretty well. We missed 11 of 12 shots from three-point range in the first 20 minutes. That was the crux of the situation. We ended up going 16 for 28 in the second half. We finished shooting 50% overall, but we were only 20% from beyond the three-point line. And that's really the first time this season that Oklahoma State has looked susceptible in any way, right? We've had some big wins already without all of our starters available. This is kind of another one of those scenarios where we probably could have done things a little bit differently. Matter of fact, we probably could have went a little bit more guard heavy because Texas A&M Corpus Christi, they're a scrappy team. They play hard, but, they shouldn't have been super competitive with Oklahoma State, but they were. They were for a large portion of the game, and we just weren't hitting shots. This is the beauty of this Oklahoma State team, though. The last, 5 years? If we were shooting that number, it didn't matter who we were playing. We were probably going to lose. We have enough talent and depth now that if the shots from the outside aren't falling, we're still good enough to do some damage down in the paint, get ourselves to the free throw line, get some stops defensively, get up and down the floor to get the other team out of their game, and then have the depth to continuously push that pace 24/7. We couldn't do that last year. We didn't have the depth. The talent that we did have had to put up 25, 30 points in a ball game, or Oklahoma State likely was not going to have an opportunity to win. And we noticed at the tail end of this last year, we did have guys like Abu Usman kind of take over and put themselves in a completely different viewpoint at the end of the season as opposed to when things started. So if this team right now has even close to the same progression that this last team had, we're in good shape. But it does remind us all that we're not a juggernaut, right? We're not a bona fide, certified, Elite 8, Sweet 16 style of team right now. So there's going to be games like this. There's going to be games that we play as good as anybody. We can beat anybody. We can have Roy with 25, Christian Coleman with 20, Isaiah Coleman with 20, Victorious Miller with 20. There are going to be games that happens. We're good enough, and we have enough talent and depth to beat anybody in the country, or at least play with anybody in the country. But at the same point in time, there's going to be nights like this where we do look very beatable. And we kind of look like the shooting team of the last 4 or 5 years as opposed to the first 4 games of the season. All that to be said, we are still undefeated. We're kind of rising in the Ken Palm. I think we're number 39 right now. So we're right inside the top 40 for the Ken Palm rankings, which is kind of like a PFF style of thing, I think you could say, for basketball. It just, it was good. It was good for us to see that this team does still have some limitations, and there's still going to be some instances throughout the course of the season that we get a little frustrated, and that's okay, because this team has the depth and the talent and the ability to kind of, mask some of the deficiencies, unlike last year. To get W's in this previous season, most everything kind of had to go our way. That was a nice reminder that we're good enough now that when things aren't going very well and we're shooting 20% from the 3-point line, we can still get almost a 20-point victory. The Big 12 is going to test us, obviously, significantly more than A&M Corpus Christi. But that was a game we'd lost last, 3 years, probably? The last 4 years even, maybe? If we shoot 20% from the 3-point range without the depth, we're probably not getting a W. So thankfully, we can complain about that we look kind of sloppy, right? But it's an ugly kind of W. We still got a W. This basketball team is going to do some things that have us reminiscing of some of the old school Cowboy basketball days. Maybe not quite like 80 Sutton yet, but I appreciate the intensity and the tenacity and the depth and the ability to rotate, right? I mean, we saw Parsa Fella really getting his first bout of foul trouble, and then Andre Vukovic played most of the game and was beyond serviceable. Yeah, I mean, he didn't do some of the things that Parsa can do, but Andre Vukovic last year couldn't even really give us a legit 5 minutes. Now he's not only giving us minutes, but he's an individual that you have some faith out there. He's going to be able to get some stops. He's going to be able to get some rebounds. He's going to change the shot trajectory for individuals driving through the paint. He's going to be able to kind of help us on the glass. He's more than just a place filler for 3 minutes, which means his elevation from last year to this year is pretty remarkable. So I have no doubts that Steve Lutz and this basketball team are going to be fine. We're still going to be a top 5, top 6 Big 12 style of team, which is good enough to obviously make a dance. But we needed to see this. We are still human. We are still learning. We're still trying to figure out the proper rotation. We're still trying to find out the right pieces to have 5 guys out on the floor at the same time. And there's still a lot of things that we're going to have to work through. But it's better to see it now than coming into Big 12 play thinking that we were ready to cut down the nets. It's a possibility, but nonetheless, it was good to see Cowboy wrestling have so many young dudes step up in a massive way. It was nice to see the Cowboy basketball squad get a W even when things were kind of ugly, because that always hasn't been the case. Anywho, that's all we're going to have for this one right here. As always, I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. Thank you for tuning in to make this your first listen here in Locked On Oklahoma State. You could be anywhere. So happy you choose to be here. Do me a favor, hit the like button if you liked it, dislike if you didn't. That's okay too. More importantly, share, comment, and subscribe. My podcast and people out there, you're everything that makes this work. So I appreciate what you do. Go do what you do. Hit the stars. Leave some reviews. All right, y'all. Later, my taters.